I'm Amy Harrington. It's December 13th, 2013, and I'm conducting an interview with Randolph Mantooth on behalf of the Archive of American Television at the TV Academy headquarters in North Hollywood, California. So we're going to start with about 10 minutes worth of background information.
Okay.
So what was your name at birth?
Randy. Randy Mantooth. The reason why I laugh is that I've hated my middle name for so long, but it's time to let it out there. It's DeRoy.
DeRoy. Where did that name come from?
I have no idea. My mom just decided. Really, my dad's name is Don. They called him Buck. There's not a Randy in my family. I think my mom, I think she told me once that she read some book, probably a romance novel or something, and the character's name was Randy, and she liked that. I've hated Randy for a long time because it's a nickname. I just didn't like nicknames, especially Randy. Try going to Europe with that name. Randy over there means a lot different than it does here. But then she named me DeRoy, and don't know where she come up with that one either. So, but my birth name is Randy DeRoy Mantooth.
So when did it become Randolph?
When I was going to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, and I was at the administration desk, and the lady said, she said, well, what's your name? And I said, Randy Mantooth. And she goes, She goes, you might want to think about changing your name. And I went, you're right. Make it Randolph. And she goes, that's not the name I meant. And I went, change my last name? Mantooth? She said, yeah. And I said, what would I tell my dad? So I said, no, just change it to Randolph. So
when and where were you born?
I was born in Sacramento, California, right at the, I'm a baby boomer, 1945, and born in Sutter Hospital.
And where did you grow up?
I lived in 24 states before I was 18 years old, so that's a real tough question to answer. My dad was a pipeline construction worker, so wherever the pipeline went, that's where we went. My dad was born in Oklahoma. My mother was born in Nebraska. My younger sister, who's just 18 months younger than I am, was born in Omaha, Nebraska. My brother was born in Oneida, New York, and my little sister was born in El Campo, Texas. And I started kindergarten in Brockton, Massachusetts. Played high school football in Sullivan, Illinois. Then finally we moved as a junior. When I was a junior, we moved to Santa Barbara, California.
What was your dad's name?
Buck Mantooth, Donald Mantooth.
And what about your mother? What was her name and what did she do?
Sadie Mantooth, Sadie Nidenrip. She's a German from Nebraska. And my mom was a waitress. And after my parents split up, my mom raised 4 kids as a single parent on a waitress salary. And when we were all seniors in high school, we were promised that if we kept our grades above a C, nothing below, that we would all get a car for our senior year, and all 4 of us got a car. And my mom worked until she was 72 years old as a waitress. What
traits do you think you inherited from your parents?
My dad's sense of storytelling, sort of sense of humor, and hopefully I've acquired the traits of my mom through hard work and just sheer determination.
What were your interests growing up?
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Loved animals, loved being around animals. I really liked moving. I liked that. It was real hard on some kids, some of the other pipeliner kids. They hated it. Me, I loved it. But I was always kind of living in my head because I never had real close friends unless they were other pipeline kids. Because I was never in any town long enough to really cultivate long-lasting relationships with people. So I was always living in a kind of my own little fantasy world. And wherever I would go next, I was just on to my next little Walter Mitty fantasy.
Were you interested in acting at all?
You know, that's a hard question to answer, because I don't think I ever really said, you know, I'm going to be an actor. It just happened. I just kept doing what I was doing, which, you know, led me from one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And so, yeah, I suppose, you know, I was always interested in acting on a real dogmatic level, because I was always acting anyway. I was always acting like, I hated being the new kid in town. That's the one thing I did hate. So I would always act like I'd been there for a long time. So I was always acting anyway. And it just so happened that, you know, somebody put me up on stage at San Marcos High School in Santa Barbara. It was the first time I had ever really actually been on stage. And I'm like 15, 16 years old, and I'm playing, I'm in The Crucible, and I'm playing the lead in The Crucible. I had no idea what I was saying. I didn't understand anything. I just memorized them and said the words. But I never forgot the feeling I got when I could feel the audience, when I could hear them breathe. I could just by me talking, it created an atmosphere that I could literally palpably feel. And it was like I got a fever. I went, oh, this feels good. And so I think that's when, although I never really made a conscious decision to be an actor, I just knew that I was very comfortable there, and I'd like to try to stay there as long as I could.
Did you watch a lot of TV when you were growing up?
No, not really. Yeah, I mean, you know, not any more than any other person. I do remember my favorite show was the Andy Griffith Show, because I always wanted Andy Griffith to be my dad. And I remember really liking that show a lot. There were other shows, Bonanza, you know, shows like that.
What did you do after high school?
I went to Santa Barbara City College. You know, I had developed a cadre of friends from the theater. And everybody, when we started to graduate, everybody said, well, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And a lot of them said, well, I'm going to go to Santa Barbara City College. And I said, well, okay, I want to go where my friends go. So I went to Santa Barbara City College. Then one day they all said, hey, you know, we're thinking about going to the American Academy. American Academy, what's that? That's an academy for actors, American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York. Really? You're all going there? Yeah, well, I want to go there too. So, you know, I was just following my friends. I really wasn't following to be an actor, although I was, but I hadn't made that decision. I just wanted to be around my friends. And then I got seen in a show called Philadelphia, Here I Come, with Brad Davis, and we both shared the Best Actor award for that year. It was the first time they'd split the award, and talent scout at Universal Studios, Eleanor Kilgallen, saw the show and asked me to come in and asked me if I wanted to sign a contract at Universal Studios. And I was very dubious about it at first, because I would be leaving my friends. You know, I had kind of hung out with them now for years, and I also felt guilty that, you know, a lot of them were doing the same play I was doing, or a series of plays, and I was the only one that got picked, and I felt kind of guilty about that. And plus, I wanted to suffer for my art, and honestly, I felt like I had sold out. But I was homesick. I wanted to go home. And I remember asking her, I said, well, will you pay for the ticket to go back to California? I said, like, I'm, you know, 20 and stupid. She said, well, of course, you know. And I said, round trip? And she goes, no, this would be a one-way trip. And I said, oh, okay, all right, I'll do it. And so
you came back to Hollywood?
No, I actually went home to Santa Barbara, and I hung out there. I was so immature and so non-professional. I just was so glad I was home. I don't know whether I thought that they would just like pay my way there and just forget about me. But they finally called and they said, "Where have you been?" I said, "Well, I'm at my mom's house in Santa Barbara." They said, "Well, get your ass down here. You're under contract." And so I said, "Okay." So then they said, "No, none of this commuting back and forth from Santa Barbara. Get yourself an apartment." So I got myself an apartment, and I was really kind of homesick because I didn't really know L.A. L.A. was just so big for me. I really wanted to be back in Santa Barbara. But slowly but surely, and I think they knew that too. So they were always having me, kind of buddy up with these other, some of the other kids that were on contract, all the contract players. And finally, me and this one guy, we really hit it off. Bob Pratt, he was a good guy, and we kind of hit it off. And so then I thought, well, okay. Then I met a girl. Things started to get a little bit better, and then and plus I was getting, little bit parts here and there, and I was kind of leading my way up until I got the show.
Well, talk about some of the bit parts that you had during that period. What was the very first TV appearance you made? Do you remember?
Matt Lincoln. I had 2 lines.
Do you remember them?
Yeah. I was getting married, and they said, will you take this woman? And I said, I do. And we're out on the front steps of the church, and this guy next to me said, "Enjoy your honeymoon." I said, "I will." So those are my first 2 lines. I do and I will.
What kinds of roles were you getting after that?
Basically, they were just kind of grooming me for something. Although I didn't know that. I thought it was my talent that was getting this. Universal was pulling the strings all along. Like the second thing I ever did, how bizarre is this and how ironic. The second thing I ever did, I played an ambulance attendant on McLeod. Yes, McLeod. I played an ambulance attendant. And my first line on that show was, my only line, "He'll live."
A man of few words.
Yeah.
So you were actually in the pilot of McLeod. You were in the pilot episode.
I was?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Do you remember what the atmosphere was like? Do you remember your experience beyond the line?
Everything was like so new to me. I was afraid to walk across the floor for fear I was going to step on some cable. Everything was so bizarre to me, and I couldn't just grasp a lot of the things that I wish I could have grasped. All I remember is I was scared every time I went there because everybody else was having a good time and they were all so good. And when it came to me, I'd go, "He'll live." And I always felt so stilted, but whatever I was doing, it was okay, I guess, because they kept having me come back.
Excellent. We're going to stop for 1 second. So you were talking about not being sure of yourself on set. So at what point do you remember the point where you finally felt comfortable, like you were getting it?
About the 4th year of the show. Seriously, I was always a nervous wreck. For whatever reason, I to a certain degree, I'm very nervous when I'm on stage, but nothing like when I was in front of a camera because it's like all of a sudden everybody's moving around, and everything, boom, everybody stops, focuses totally on you, and and they go, "Action," and you're acting. Then they go, "Cut," okay, and then everybody's moving away, and was that good? Did you like me? It's like I got none of that. But on stage, it's your world, and you can lose yourself in those characters. And in film, I always found it was like 30-second acting, and I had a problem with that for a long time. But doing a television series, you get over that real quick. Then all of a sudden, you find yourself not acting at all. You're just trying to maintain your own personality because it would be exhausting to become a whole nother character every day, 24/7 for 7 years. You'd be exhausted. You just can't be another character for that long without, putting yourself in a straitjacket. So basically, what you're doing, with a television series is that you're just trying to be an animated you. You have to find a color in you that fits that color, and then you have to stay with that.
That's interesting. While you were under contract, did you get an agent?
Yeah, they made me get an agent. I thought I was doing pretty good without one because basically Universal was my agent. They were the ones who were watching out for me. But they were having a little problem negotiating with themselves, which is against the law. So they said, no, you got to go get an agent. And so they found Bob Razon for me and Kevin. Kevin was in the same position. Kevin, meaning my old partner who played Roy DeSoto on the show. So we both had the same agent.
And when you were at Universal, were you going on auditions, or would they just say, you're going to be in this show?
No. I would go on auditions, but I didn't realize it at the time, but I was going in with cachet that they had this little note, Monique James is very high on this kid. Monique James really packed a wallop at Universal Studios. So the producer had to have a real good reason not to hire me. But I didn't know this. So I thought I was just wowing the hell out of everybody. Well, I wasn't wowing anybody.
So you said you were nervous as an actor, but how were you treated as a guest actor going in on those shows in the early days?
If you're young, you pay your dues. Nobody's treating you well. Nobody's treating you bad. If you mess up, yeah, you get treated badly, or you'll get jerked up short. But I was treated just like everybody else. We all knew what our job was. You get there on time. You make sure you know your lines. There's a professionalism that is expected of you, and if you don't really live up to that, you really will have a very short career.
And you worked with some pretty big names early on. I mean, you worked with Hal Holbrook and
yeah.
So how was that working?
Well, Hal was great. Geez, being around Hal was just great. And I actually saw him about 6-7 months ago, and I went up to him and I said, I don't know whether you remember me or not. And he goes, I remember you. And I said, well, I just want you to know that because of you, I got a television series. And he goes, oh, well, you never told me that. And I said, well, it's true. And I, told him how. And but we're working with him. Hal was pretty big then. Of course, he's monumental now. But there were a lot of these people that I was working with that are huge stars now. But at the time, they were just like me. I didn't know who they were. They didn't know who I was. And so we were just like peers, just trying to keep our heads just above the water.
We talked a little bit about McCloud. Talk about working on the Virginia, and what was it like working on a Western?
Well, that was great, but there was this little problem that I had with my star of the picture, and I forgot his name now.
Sorry.
No, from England.
Yeah.
Stuart Granger? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so we're we're in Mexico. We're way down just north of Mexico City, right? So we're in this huge cow pasture. It looks like the open plains. No buildings anywhere as far as the eye can see. And it's kind of like this. And I forget what the director's name was, but we got along really well. And Stuart Granger was always off in his dressing room. And I was, I was a cavalryman and a lieutenant. And so so we were out in the middle of this cow pasture, and we were supposed to be shooting in this tent. Well, they had to take half the tent away, and so we're inside this kind of stand-up tent. And there were 3 people or 2 people, me and Stuart Granger, and I'm trying to tell him that the Indians are on a rampage, and he's got a blah blah blah, whatever I was trying to tell him and everything. And so during all this rehearsal, back and forth. I'm nervous. This is Stuart Granger, he's a big guy too. And so the ground was very uneven. So we get up to do a master, to do a two-shot master. And I'm standing there, praying to God that I get all my lines right and everything. And he's supposed to have his back to me, and he's supposed to swivel, turn, and then stand right here in my face. Well, I happened to be standing on a little hill. And he turned around and he said, "Well, Lieutenant, I think maybe you are taller than me. Why is this man taller than me?" And I was like, oh, I wanted to get small so fast because Stuart Granger now obviously is not happy. And I wasn't taller than him. He was actually taller than me. It's just I happened to be standing. So they said, "All right, cut," and they dug a hole for me to stand in. And I went, "Welcome to Hollywood."
Are there any other of those early roles that stand out to you?
Well, I went from doing that to Rio Bravos or something Bravos. Yeah, I remember coming and working with George Papard. What a delightful man he was. What a delightful man he was. He was just so self-effacing, ingratiatingly suave and cool, and all the women just loved him, And here we were in Flagstaff, Arizona, cold. It was in February. We were staying at a Best Western hotel, and the outside court plaza had this fountain that froze. The fountain just froze in midair. I'd never seen anything freeze like that before, and but it was just really great. The weather was just brutal because we were shooting way up in the hills, up in the mountains. And I remember the camaraderie of everybody. And I remember I didn't have warm enough clothes, so I constantly had to go around dressed as a cavalryman with the cape and the whole thing. I'd had to go into the bars and order a drink, and there I looked like, I just stepped out of the world, the Civil War. So I remember things like that. I working around very good actors, not knowing who I was working with most of the time, just knowing, wow, that guy's really good.
So you mentioned, we talked about Hal Holbrook and a little bit about The Bold Ones, but how did The Bold Ones impact your career?
Well, it changed everything. I was doing, it was called The Bold Ones, and this was called The Lawyers, I believe. It was the doctors, the lawyers, and the
senator.
The senator. That's what it was, a senator. So Hal Holbrook, so I had this scene where I was playing this young lieutenant who was in, I'm always in a uniform, it just dawned on me. Man, I'm doing a lot of uniforms there. I was a young lieutenant in the National Guard, and he was the young lieutenant who gave the order to fire at Kent State when 4 kids were killed. And I had this scene where I went and knocked on his door, and we had a scene in his hotel room, and then the next day I'm on the stand at the court proceedings, and I have to redo my story to him, and so my character, and I only found that the night before. I thought, if this is really me, I don't know whether I could deal. I don't know whether I could do all the things that my character is doing. This is really brave for him to do this, And I thought, would I do that? Would I do that? So when we were actually shooting it, my character broke down and started crying, and couldn't continue, and asked, could he leave? And it was a very, very dramatic moment, which really wasn't on script, wasn't all that dramatic. It just, he just gets up and goes. But for whatever reason, Hal Holbrook, the way he was acting with me, he pulled that out of me, and where my character just broke. And it didn't indicate it in the script or anything. And then when it ended, he waited, because he knew that the audience was going to have the same impact. And he goes, I think we should all take a break now. And that wasn't in the script. And they waited, and the director went, cut! And I could tell the way he went, cut! I went, oh, phew, thank God I don't have to do it again. And so Bob Senator, the executive producer of Emergency, was watching a screening of it. And I had no idea that the show was even being considered. And he apparently, from what I was told, he went, that is my Johnny Gage. And so I was told I would be playing Los Angeles County firefighter paramedic Johnny Gage.
So you were told by whom?
By Monique James. She called me into her office and said, darling, she always talked like that. Darling, you have a chance of a lifetime, blah, blah, blah. You're going to be playing, and I remember picking up the card because she couldn't remember it all. Los Angeles County firefighter paramedic Johnny Gage. And first thing I said was, what the hell's a paramedic? You know, because at that time there weren't paramedics. There were only 13 in all of California at that time, and nobody had ever heard of them before. And she told me, and I said, She goes, so what do you think about that? And I said, I don't know. She goes, what? I said, I don't think I really want to do it. And she goes, sit down, shut up. She goes, you are doing it. She goes, I just want to know why you would do this. I had hair down to here, by the way. And I said, well, doesn't Jack Webb own that show? Yeah. He'll want me to get my hair cut, right? Yeah. Well, I don't want to get my hair cut. Shut up. That was it. And I shut up. I signed the contract, and I became Los Angeles County firefighter paramedic Johnny Gage for 7 years.
So now the show was a spin-off of Adam 12.
No.
It was not.
No.
That's okay.
They had a little crossover
Okay.
the first year, but it was not a spinoff. It was just the same sort of idea. A spinoff is when your characters are on their show, and then they spin it off, and then they have their own show. No, ours had a beginning where it showed how paramedics became paramedics. Now, Bob was the executive producer of Adam 12, and Jack Webb was the owner of both shows. Our first year was their last year, and so Bob wanted to do a little switchover. Just in the middle, I think it was the end of the first year, we did a little bit of a crossover, but it wasn't a spinoff. No.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you clarified because it's out there as people always refer
and it's
to
wrong.
it. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
no, it's
Okay.
wrong. In the classic sense of a spinoff, it's absolutely wrong.
Excellent. But you had appeared on Adam 12 prior to that.
I did, yeah, I did. I played a horse thief, or I was accused of being a horse thief. Yeah.
Yeah, you were accused of stealing
Somebody's
some money from a
money. Oh,
from
is that what it was? Yeah,
horse
yeah.
rancher.
Yeah.
So tell us about the first time you met your partner on Emergency.
Kevin.
Yep.
It was in Jack Webb's office, and Jack's one of these old-time producers. He's also a scary guy. He can lose his temper just like that. But I remember we were in the office, and Julie London comes in, and it was long, about 7 o'clock-ish at night. The studio, everybody's getting ready to go home and everything, and this is in Jack Webb's huge office. So there was Jack Webb's lawyer, Jake Scherer, I think, and a whole bunch of people I didn't know, Universal execs. Julie London walks in. I'm like, oh my God! And I had just seen MASH, the original film MASH, and Bobby Troop was the guy at the very end. It kept going, "Goddamn Army Jeep, goddamn Army Jeep," you know. And I just thought he was so funny. All of a sudden, Bobby Troop walks in. I go, oh my God, there's Bobby Troop and Julie London. I wonder if they know each other. They were married and had 3 kids. Of course, they know one another. And then Bob Fuller walks in. I go, oh my God, wagon train, oh my God, you know. And then Kevin walks in. I went, Jesus, that guy, he must have got lost or something. What's he doing in here? A goofy guy. And they said, meet your new partner. I went, oh, really? Hey, how you doing? He's my best friend to this day.
So how did you build the chemistry that you had
I don't
on
know.
the show?
We never really tried. Just, you know, Kevin was in the same boat I was in. Hadn't ever really done anything before, a couple of this, couple of that. He was on stage with Maggie Smith. You know, he was And he didn't know the business any more than I did, and so it was more like us against them, you know. And we had the same motorhome for all 7 years. We never demanded to have separate motorhomes. We had the same motorhome. I think he got a little tired of it. I think he wanted to do another one. I said, "Oh, come on, man, we're buddies. You know, let's hang in there." We had this driver. His name is JJ, and so it was the three. This was the three Bobbsey twins. We would laugh. We would be coming back from locations, and we would be back there just crying, laughing about one thing or another. At one point, I thought JJ was going to get us into a wreck. We're going down a freeway, and he's laughing so hard, and we're in this huge motorhome, right? But it was just a glorious, glorious time.
So when you first heard about the role, you had never heard of a paramedic before. So how did you familiarize yourself with the job?
Well, they made us train with the fire department, and they made us train as paramedics. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a paramedic. We didn't take any of the written tests or anything, but they wanted us to be physically able to do this. So we hung around paramedic classes for a long time. At that time, it was 3 months. 3 months class. Now it's like almost 2 years. And we learned how to do an IV. I remember starting my very first IV on Bob Beliveau, a guy with veins that looked like garden hoses on his arm. And I'll never forget that first insertion when I could feel that needle go, pop, and I went, cool. I can do this. And I think I got the fever at that time. And then, of course, we trained with the fire department.
So talk about the tone of the show, because it was a great balance of dramatic and humor. Yeah,
and that was strictly Bob Senator. Bob Senator, who was the creator and the executive producer of it, he wanted it to be funny, but he said, when the bell rings, funny is left at the door. You are now a professional. And of course, we never got away from that. When we first started the show, Bob Senator said, we are going to be as real as we possibly can be, as possible as the confines of the 1970s will let us be. He didn't use it in those terms, but I now know what he meant. And he said, we will not make up any rescues. Every rescue is going to have to be, you're going to have to prove to me that you got that rescue out of somebody's log, out of some fire department's log. It doesn't have to be LA County, it doesn't have to be LAC, it doesn't even have to be California. Get it out of any log. But you got to bring it to me, and you got to prove to me that really did happen, because we're not making anything up. Well, of course, the writers just, it's like, oh, you're tying our hands. Then he started reading the logs, and they went, Jesus, we can't make this crap up. And then at the end of the 7 years, every writer, we had 12 writers, every writer said, this is the easiest job we've ever had. So it was maintaining that realism, where today, and I'm not saying anything bad about them. I just feel like Hollywood thinks that they can always improve it, where 9 times out of 10, you just kind of get in the way. Nothing is better than a real situation. Now, they didn't have to go by the book with it. They didn't have. He said, you can mess with it, you can move it around, do whatever, but it's got to be a real rescue. And if it takes place in Florida and you have to adapt it to California, fine, you can do that, but you can't make it up.
Do you think that's what separated the show from the other shows on TV at the time?
Oh yeah. Universal loved the show, but NBC didn't. They thought it looked too much like a documentary, and for its time it did. You would laugh at it now. You look at it now and you go, documentary. But at the time, it did look like a documentary. I still get people who say, "Hey, I was 30 years old before I realized, that you're really just an actor. I thought you were a real firefighter." And that's a real compliment. But it's hard to quantify. In my mind, it was the first procedural show, because we never went home with Johnny Gage. We never went home with Roy DeSoto. We didn't hear about Johnny Gage's drunk father beating his mother. It's like, who cares about that? It was about the job. That's what was important. And now and we had to do that with NBC saying nobody can die, and you can't see any blood. Well, of course, Jack and Bob said it's about emergency. People die, and people bleed. Well, but they still put those restrictions on us. But by the third, fourth year, we're so popular, we had people dying all over the place, and people started bleeding again. But in that very beginning, we were doing that in the confines of some very restrictive rules that we had to live by. Now, you get brain matter on people's shirt and go like that. I think it goes a little too far, but it has evolved into something a lot more realistic. But even though it's a lot more realistic, it becomes a little bit more unrealistic. It's not that same sense of drama that Emergency had. And I've spent 40 years trying to figure out, how the hell did Bob Senator do this? He was brilliant. I wish I could take credit for it, but I can't.
Was there other censorship on the show beyond the blood and the death?
Me saying to hell with your orders was like, oh my God, like I had dropped an F-bomb or something. Just round and round and round and round and round about me saying to hell with your orders. But Jack Webb won. Jack Webb said he's saying it, and so they didn't bleep it.
Do you remember shooting the pilot? What was your experience shooting the pilot?
I remember shooting the pilot very much so. Again, didn't know what I'd gotten myself into. I never really plan ahead for anything, and I just knew that I had to be as professional as I could. I was a physical guy anyway, so all that was down pat. But I had never in my life ever worked from a teleprompter, and I did not want a teleprompter. That was Jack Webb's way of acting, teleprompter. And one day he took me through 37 takes because I refused to look at the teleprompter. He beat me down. And I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna die. He's not gonna let me up. And finally I did that whole scene and I read straight across. But true to form, my eyes went up on the last word because I refused to not look towards the camera. And he knew that was as best he was going to get. I hated that moment. I hated that day. That was a bad day.
So was there always a teleprompter on set after that?
No. Once Bob took over, Bob said, no teleprompters. Get them out of here. Julie, if you want a teleprompter, and she did for the first year or so, but then she got rid of the teleprompters too. But if you wanted a teleprompter, you could have, but nobody wanted a teleprompter. Nobody. And that's old school crap, We're actors.
So let's talk about Johnny Gage. How would you describe him?
He's a goofy, loose cannon kind of guy that if I, fell off of my roof cleaning the gutters, I'd want him to be there because he knows what he's doing. But he's funny. He's boy-like. But when the bell goes off, he's a professional. That was everything that I wanted to make him. And Bob Senator encouraged it all along the way. He said, "You have a great sense of humor. We're gonna work that in." And season 3, 4, and 5, I think I was at my most comfortable. That was when I was flying. They trusted me enough to let me ad-lib. They trusted Kevin enough to let him ad-lib. We would ad-lib on the rescues because we now knew the rescues better than any director because we do it every day and they come in once a week. So we would walk over with because always right by our side were real paramedics dressed just like us, only they had a sign on them that says "for real," and they were right there. And we would all three get together and we'd say, "Well, we wouldn't bring them out that way. Well, we could do this, we'd do this," and then we'd tell everybody else, "Can you position the car this way?" And that's never been done before. But they trusted us. They knew that we knew what we were doing, and that we weren't, just kind of, doing it for our own egos.
That's cool. So was Johnny based on any real person?
Yeah, it's based on Jim Page. And Jim Page was, we always had technical advisors on the show. They were real paramedics on their off times, would take the whole week. And they loved it. They loved being on a movie set. And their whole job was to tell the director, we wouldn't do that. And they said, just tell them, then walk away. Don't argue with them. And if I find out that they didn't change it, I'll fire them. But you just tell them that, and then walk away. So that's that technical advisor. Then we had a technical consultant. He was a battalion chief. His name was Jim Page. And big guy. And he wanted the paramedic department. You have to understand, at that time, the politics were that the fire department didn't want paramedics. As oddly as that may sound now, they didn't want anything to do with it. Their mantra was, we put out fires, we don't deliver babies. But there was a big segment of the fire department, including the chief, who did, because they saw the handwriting on the wall. They knew that their budget depended on whether they got paramedics or not. Otherwise, they'd just be sitting at, back in their lazy boys back at the house eating donuts, and waiting for fires. And they were so good at preventing fires that was a dying proposition. So Jim Page really pushed for the paramedics. He was also getting threatened by his own bosses about pushing this paramedic thing, and they also hated the idea that he was the technical consultant for this brand new show called Emergency. They hated that. And so he was always being threatened. He was threatened that he probably would never be promoted up. And that's a big thing for a chief, and not being able to promote up to the chief if you can make it that far. So he was always being threatened to just be outright let go by some of his bosses. And so when they were shooting this show, he was so instrumental and helpful to Jack Webb and Bob Senator with this, that Jack one day decided he wanted to name one of the characters after him. And so Bob, but when Jim found out about it, he went down there and he says, thank you, this is a huge honor, and thank you very much, and I really appreciate it. But if you name that character after me, they will fire me. And he said, okay, all right, nobody wants you to get fired. So they moved the name from Jim Page to John Gage.
What were Johnny's strengths and what were his weaknesses?
Well, we're talking fictional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. His weakness was anything that was pretty. And he had a big heart, and he never knew how to say no. And his strengths is that he is the most loyal. And this is either can be viewed as a strength or as a weakness, but he saw nothing too dangerous, and that could and did get him into a lot of trouble. A lot of times, he just pushed the envelope a little too far sometimes.
So you mentioned earlier that an actor has to kind of amp up his own personality to be a character on a TV show for that long. So how are you like Johnny, and how are you different?
Well, a pretty girl gets my attention. I don't know. When I'm working, I'm a professional, and I will take it to the end. If I believe in what I'm doing, and I believe in the people that I'm working with, I'll stay in the trenches with you forever. So I guess in that sense, and I do tell a pretty good story, but I don't know whether Johnny ever told a story or not. He wasn't quite the storyteller. He was more the reactionary guy. He reacted to everything, and Johnny was only funny because Kevin let him be funny, because Roy let him be funny, because the whole world enjoyed the whole world. A lot of people really loved Johnny. But when he would do some of the things he would do, they would always look over at Roy to go, Has he gone too far? And if Roy would go, like that, then everybody goes, oh, okay, Johnny's okay. So if it wasn't for Kevin, if it wasn't for Roy, Johnny would, that show could not have just been the Johnny Gage show. Couldn't, because there was nothing for Johnny to play off of. And Johnny is, if he's anything, he's a flawed human being who always thinks he's going to get rich doing something. And Roy allowed him to be this crazy guy. But when that bell goes off, they're both right there.
Did Johnny evolve over the course of the show, do you think?
Yeah, he did. Well, yeah, he did in a lot of ways. He became more confident, a little bit more cocky, and of course his hair got longer.
You finally won.
Yeah, I did.
Did you have a lot of input into the character?
Oh yeah, yeah. Bob really sort of insisted on that. We would sit at the I think it was every Friday night, Thursday night, whatever night it was. We would all meet in his office, have the next week's script in our hand, and we'd read it. And Bob would be watching us like crazy. And whenever I would kind of riff on the lines, I'd find them in the script the next day. And I just thought that was just so cool.
You said the storylines came from the logs, but did you ever suggest any storylines that you saw?
The only time that we would suggest anything would be for the, not the rescues, but the storylines in between. We would suggest that. And sometimes they were taken up and sometimes they weren't.
Was there anything you were asked to do that you protested?
Wow, no, I don't believe there was. I hated being in the water. I hated that. Kevin loved it. He was like a dolphin. I hated it. But that didn't mean I didn't get into the water. I loved being up high. Kevin hated it. He was terrified of heights, and I was like a monkey. So I would always kind of mess around with him up top, and he'd have his way with me down in the water. I hated it. I'd be paddling water, and he would come up underneath me and then pull me down. And I'd go, "It's not funny. It's not funny." And I particularly hated cold water. Couldn't stand cold water. My voice goes up 3 octaves. I sound like a soprano when I'm in the water. And but the only time that I said, no, I'm not doing this, was we were shooting on the back lot, and there was this huge vat of water, huge. It was for, you use them to shoot underwater sequences, and somehow they had taken one of the lights, and they had the ground, and so the whole tub. So when you jumped in the water, it was tingly electricity. Well, turns out I also don't like electricity. And so when I got into the water, everybody's going, whoa. And I could hear them all in the water going, whoa, whoa, I'm feeling electricity. And I'm like, what? Electricity, water doesn't, not a good combination at all. So he said, no. And one of the stunt guys came up and he goes, it's not that bad. I said, I don't care how bad it is. I said, what do you mean it's not that bad? He goes, it only tingles a little bit. Well, I couldn't believe that Kevin was in the water. I couldn't believe that these other stunt guys were in the water. I couldn't believe all these people were in the water. I thought, what are you, all crazy? So it's like, oh my God, I don't want to look like, a wimp here. So I jumped in the water. I came out of there like one of those Disney penguin movies. I mean, I was up out of that water onto the thing, and I said, I'm not doing that. Are you guys crazy? I'm not doing it. And that was the only time I went to my dressing room, scared to death. Wasn't doing that one.
It sounds like a good call.
Yeah, it was.
So did you do your own stunts all the time?
Yeah. I'll tell you how they got us to do it. Try telling a 20, 21, 22-year-old kid, this is what they would say. They'd say, okay, boys, come on in here now. We're going to have the stunt guy, jump that wall and then rappel down here, and then he's going to rescue this, and then he's going to come out through that fire and everything because he's going to do it because we know you can't do it. What? What do you mean? What do you mean I can't do it? I can't do that. Really? You can? Well, prove it. Roll it. And they got away with that for about 4 or 5 years until finally I went, holy moly, man, don't I have a stuntman? And so whenever you see the show, if you can see my face, that's us. If you can't see my face, then you darn well know that I got my stuntman. You go do it.
Did you ever get hurt doing a stunt?
Yeah, I got burned a little bit, but never really got hurt bad. In all the 7 years, our safety was so good that was really only one person ever really got hurt bad. And that was a stuntman from Europe who did it himself, who wanted to make a name for himself because he wanted a green card to work over here, and he was working under a special arrangement. And so he knew he needed a job, so he came in and he decided he was going to make our stunt guys look, like wimps. And they put way too much accelerant on him. And when we lit him, Kevin and I couldn't get him out. We couldn't get him out because no matter what we did, the accelerant was so much that it just defeated all of our efforts to put him out. He got burned pretty bad.
Were there rules about what Johnny could and couldn't do? Was there anything that was kind of off limits for the characters?
Well, yeah, but I don't think it was any one thing that was ever discussed. I mean, just common sense rules. Johnny can't drink and drive. He can't. Just common sense stuff. Yeah. I don't think it was ever really discussed. He wouldn't do that.
Let's talk about a typical week of production on the show. Talk about production on an episode of Emergency.
Yeah, it took 5 days to shoot one show. Sometimes it would take 6, but most of the time it took 5 days to shoot 1 hour. And those were some brutal days. Those were some really early days. Up at 5 a.m., in makeup at 7, in front of the camera either by 7:30 or 8. And then usually, if we're shooting on location, shoot 10, 11 o'clock at night, go home, eat, go to bed, get back up and do the same thing every day. And since we were on the show almost constantly, we got very few days off. Saturday and Sunday, of course, nobody worked, unless we were in location. But, far away location. We would read the script Thursday nights, I think it was, for next week, because then they would take the script and go through the changes on Friday to get ready for Monday's next shoot. Probably, and we would leapfrog directors. We had about 4 or 5 regular directors that we always used. And every now and then we'd bring in a guest director and see how they would turn out. But it was 3 or 4, 5 directors that we would always use, and so it became a real family. So, and what they would do is they would, you always shoot your location stuff, like out in the valley or wherever, if it's out, if it's an outdoor stunt, they'd do those first, and then we'd end our week by either doing the hospital stuff for 1 full day or doing the fire station stuff for 1 full day.
And where did you shoot the hospital and the fire station?
The hospital was on stage 33, Universal, and just right across the alley on stage 31. 31, 32, 31. Just right across the alleyway was the fire station.
And did you get, if the scripts were rewritten on Friday and you shot on Monday, did you get any rehearsal time?
No. We just, we didn't need it. We knew what had to be said. We knew basically what had to be done. If you'll look at the rescues, you'll see that they're not very heavy dialogue driven. It's all physical stuff. So common sense says, okay, well, I got to cut her out of the car, then I'll hand her off to Kevin. Kevin's got to pull her, So it's like you can't really rehearse that. It's better to just do it once. And we tell all the actors and the actresses that were working on the show, we're not really going to rehearse this, so play it for real. You really are in a car accident. Just, and when it comes time to your line, don't worry if you're late on the line or you're early. We're going to react to whatever you say or whatever you do. you know. And usually whatever I say is, take it easy, everything's going to be okay. And I said, so if I don't say, you know, hey, it's okay, you just hang in there. If I don't say that, don't let that throw you, because I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say, take it easy. You're going to be all right.
You mentioned Jack Webb a bit, but talk about working with him.
Jack was very problematic in working with him. Jack, when I first met him, he said to me, he said, you ever see the movie? He was so charming, you know. Do you ever see the movie The D.I.? And I hadn't. You know, and he said, go rent it. He said, because that's who I am. And I went, oh, okay. And I didn't. I should have, because the DI is a drill instructor, and that's how he directs, and that's certainly how he directed with me. And he was very charming when we're out on location, because he knew he had his battles to fight with the sun and the weather and the whole thing and everything. But once we got into a controlled environment like the stage, that was when he decided he was going to take over the authority, and he's going to display to the crew who's the boss. He takes the youngest guy and he beats him down, and that was me. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that was what he was doing. I thought he just hated me. So my self-esteem plummeted. But it was very effective, because and the crew loved me, but nobody came to my rescue, because they all went there for the grace of God go I. And I never really forgave Jack for that. I mean, we worked together. We were always cordial after that, but I told him that I hated his guts at that time, and he just smiled.
So at what point did you realize that that's what he was doing?
But much later, Bob, Senator, told me that that's what. I said, I don't know what I ever did to him. He was so nice to me all the time. He said, he got you in a control situation. And he said he wanted to control his crew, and he did it through you. And it made total sense to me. It, you know, good reason, but not a very good excuse. Good reason.
And how much influence did he have on the production values, the look and feel of the show?
None.
It was Bob.
Bob.
So let's talk a little bit more about Bob. Talk about working with him.
Bob was great. Bob Senator was, he was a grump. He had 2 Coke bottle glasses, you know, that looked like looking out the bottom of 2 Coke bottles, but he was so smart. He used to be an interpreter in the UN. He's from the Bronx, right? Although you look at him, you go, "You're from the Bronx? You look like you're from, I don't know, you know, but not the Bronx." But he was, and he was an interpreter for the UN. And I don't know how he became, but he was just single-mindedly one of the most smartest guys. And he loved the paramedics. He loved firefighters. And he, after the show ended, he sat for 7 years on the Los Angeles County Fire Paramedic Board. He was that smart. And he used that TV show to show the fire department and the paramedics where you're screwing up. And he'd say, you should change that. And they say, no. Yeah. So he'd just put it on TV, and they'd go, yeah, you know, maybe that doesn't. But he used that to change policies. Now, I didn't know this at the time. I'm just an actor, you know, trying to get a date, you know.
We're going to stop and change tapes.
Sure.